Part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. All this for only $35.95 a month. Say Super Sports Pack into your voice remote to order.
This is Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Krista McKee. We have traveled to Little Tub, which is in Tobermory, the top of the county of Bruce, and we have linked up with Scarlett, who is the chairman of the Ontario Marine Heritage Committee, and Scarlett has lined up some really unique people for us today. So Scarlett, please introduce our guests.
Sure, I'm very happy to do that. This is Rich, and he's going to be our boat captain today. He's also a member of OMHC. This is Doug Holmes. He's a former chair of OMHC, and both of them are divers as well, so we're very tuned into what's going on in the area and both up and down the coast of both sides of the peninsula.
And I'm really excited to get onto I'm a little nervous about the boat, I have to admit, but I am excited to have a peek at what you're going to show us today, because the history that's here is stuff that we don't see. And when you're in your own town, you get to see buildings and plaques, etc., and you know what history is. Here's the unknown history. You kind of have to be a diver to get the gist of what's going on. So we're really pleased to be able to bring what you're going to show us to our viewers today. So I'm excited.
Well, we've got something lined up for you. We're going to head out to Cove Island first.
Okay.
And there's a imperial lighthouse there. So we're going to talk about that. We can't get onto Cove Island for various reasons, but we'll be able to talk about a bit the history of the lighthouse and some of the wrecks that might be nearby as well, and might even get a glimpse of some divers going in once in a while on some of these wrecks.
Nifty. Yeah, I'm excited to learn about Cove Island, and I know Rich is a wealth of information as well, and you're our captain, so my life is in your hands today.
I promise to take good care of you.
That's good.
I'd be scared, by the way.
Oh, is there something I don't know about?
Not that I know.
No, okay. Good. Well, I'm excited to get on board, so we'll get on and you'll take us out onto the water.
You bet. All right.
Okay.
Well, welcome aboard. Let me just help you down.
Okay.
Yep.
Fabulous.
Very good.
We'll see you at the end of your trip, Krista, and maybe we can meet up at the Parks Canada Visitor Center as well, okay?
Wonderful.
Enjoy your trip.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Well, welcome, Krista, to the northeast corner of Cove Island. And we're looking at the Cove Island Lighthouse, which is a very significant piece of the maritime history of this entire region. There were a couple of things that happened in the mid-1850s that led to the development of this aid to navigation. In 1855, the Soo Locks were opened up in Sault Ste. Marie, which allowed free passage of cargo ships in and out of Lake Superior. And around that same time, the government of Canada and the United States entered into one of the early free trade agreements to allow the goods and services to move back and forth freely between the two countries as the U.S. was developing the North and the Midwest, and as Canada and Ontario was developing this part of the province. So it was advantageous for both countries to allow goods to move back and forth. And those goods were everything from wheat to corn to raw cut timber to finished lumber, iron ore, coal, telephone poles, and all the things that were needed to basically begin the construction in those two countries. So by 1856, there was a demand for improved aids to navigation in this region because this became a very, very busy thoroughfare with sailing ships primarily moving stuff back and forth across the Great Lakes. And so the government of Canada at the time, which of course pre-Confederation, working with the British Commonwealth, obtained some money to build 6 imperial lighthouses or imperial towers, of which the Cove Island Lighthouse is one. There was a general contractor from Thorold, Ontario, near Niagara Falls, which actually got the contract to build all 6 of these imperial lighthouses, and this one was the first one that was constructed of the 6.
So how would they get all the materials up here? Like, we've had quite a 10-minute ride from the harbor, Little Tub Harbor, to get here. So how did they get up here in 1855?
Well, in 1855, 1856, of course, there were really dirt roads that kind of traversed the country from the Niagara Peninsula up to here. And of course, stuff could be moved by boat as well during the summer period. And some of the stuff even moved over top of the ice if the area could freeze in completely. So it was definitely an arduous task to move everything up. The one thing that they did, which is a little different from other lighthouses of the time, was that they built this one using all cut rock out of this particular area. Some of the previous lighthouses were built with wood and cement, but this one actually is constructed all of cut stone from this region of the Bruce Peninsula. In addition to the lighthouse keeper's home and the original fog house as well, were all constructed out of stone from the area. So they kind of used building materials from here and had to transport workers up to do the job.
How long would a person stay or be kept here as a lighthouse keeper? Like, would it be like a 1-year contract, 2-year contract, or was it just something they were here until they quit? How did that work?
Well, the lighthouse keepers of that day were oftentimes retired mariners. Ship captains from right across Canada would often apply to be a lighthouse keeper, and they would come and work here for basically as long as their careers would allow or their health would allow.
Right. So there's no one here now.
No one lives here now. No, the island is part of the Fathom 5 National Park and is protected and is not allowed to have people on the island either hiking or camping or anything like that.
So this is a really neat opportunity for you to see this because you cannot stop and be on this island. Is it the tallest lighthouse in the area, do you know? Like there's so many.
All 6 of them were about the same height, these imperial structures. And yes, as far as I know, there aren't any that are taller than this.
Why was this the site picked for this lighthouse?
This is probably one of the most important sites to have an aid to navigation for those mariners back in that mid-1800s period, because once the Great Lakes transportation industry really opened up and took off, this became like the 401 of ship traffic back and forth between Georgian Bay and virtually all the rest of the Great Lakes. And all of those ships travel just a little bit north of here and through what's called the main channel, which then connects over to Lake Huron and then over into the rest of the Great Lakes system. So this was a major navigation point for those ships. It also tends to be a very hazardous area with lots of exposed shoals, very shallow areas that were obvious hazards to the mariners of the day. They didn't have things like ship-to-shore radio back then, and very few, fancy electronic navigation units like we have today. So there was a lot of local knowledge of the captains. They used various sightings on land that they knew, landmarks on land. But this became very confusing in the fog and in low visibility. So this was a very dangerous area all through this part of the northern Bruce Peninsula, which is why there are so many shipwrecks here. Tobermory is known as the freshwater shipwreck capital of the world.
Yes.
And it's really for a very good reason that there were a lot of shipwrecks here because of the hazardous conditions and the very severe weather that happens in the fall as well. So this became a major point, and it was an absolute beautiful sight for the early captains to, be coming across from either the east or westerly direction to be able to see that light or hear that foghorn and know that they were at the tip of Cove Island and knew that they were on course. So it really was a key navigation aid of the day.
Right. And you are a historian on some of the wrecks. So I think that's our next stop, possibly, Captain Rick?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm a longtime diver in the Tobermory area and a ship captain up here, working for a Divers Den dive shop. So we routinely take divers to all of the different dive sites around. And of course, knowing the history of the wreck, why it went down, the interesting features about it, and things for divers to see makes it just that much more of a exciting experience for the diver. So, you know, in the course of kind of learning about this area, you learn about the history of these different wreck sites as well. So it makes it very fascinating.
Very fascinating, and it's something that we can't see, and that's the part that I'm so intrigued about. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can hardly wait for the next stop.
Good. Okay. Well, we'll maybe fire up and say goodbye to Cove Island Lighthouse, and we'll head down the shoreline to Tecumseh Cove, where an old wreck called the Minch is in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get there.
Okay, great. So this was a little short trip from the lighthouse, but we are still, what's behind us?
We're still here in Tecumseh Cove, which is on the southeast corner of Cove Island, just south of the lighthouse where we came from.
Okay. I'm a little confused. There's so many islands, so I'm not sure whether we're still connected, but this is still Cove Island. So why have we stopped here?
Well, this was just an interesting place to stop on our way back to Tobermory to kind of connect the story about aids to navigation and the lighthouse. This is on top of the wreck of the Charles P. Minch, and it was a 3-masted schooner that was en route to Chicago with a load of lumber and had intended to kind of go around the north part of Cove Island and use the lighthouse as an aid to navigation,
Right.
but got caught in a storm, and gale force winds forced it in against the shoreline, where it foundered and sank here in Tecumseh Cove. So it was kind of a way to talk a little bit about the importance of navigation aids and the lighthouse, and also the challenges to those early mariners because of wind and weather and the use of sailing technology, which presented all kinds of new problems trying to avoid bad weather and big waves and wind and stuff like that. So, we're here on top of the wreck of the Charles P. Minch just as an example of the challenges of navigation of the day.
Yeah, and I could see if the winds did change, how it would just push you right in here. Like, and it sails, right? So how do you divert a boat to go back out against the wind, right? It's a little tricky.
Yeah, exactly. The captain of the Minch, Captain Kaufman, actually came in here originally to be protected from a southwesterly gale, so winds that would be blowing from that direction here. And so he came into anchor to wait out the storm. But while he was anchored with the sails down, the wind shifted around 180 degrees, and now he was right facing into the teeth of a northeasterly gale with his sails down, and basically he was doomed at that point. Impossible to pull up anchors, put sails up, and sail back out right into the teeth of that northeasterly gale. So what happened was it basically blew the ship ashore. It went aground and foundered and sank here. Fortunately, the captain and all the crew members were saved, and they went ashore in a yawl boat, and then were rescued by a boat out of Tobermory.
So we're moving closer into Tobermory then as we go.
We're on our way back to Tobermory now. We're going to head over to Russell Island, which is kind of between here and Tobermory, for our final stop, and then back to the harbor.
Okay, good.
Great.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
I am Gagweg. My name means everything.
Tom Longboats.
I am Wolf Clan, Onondaga Nation. I've run many different races. I've run to survive and to be free. I've run to win for honor.
His people might be lazy, but this one's damn fast.
My people respected our runners, people who carried important messages from village to village.
I need a guide to the next post. Dispatch carrier, sir. I can get you there.
God's sakes, man, slow down. Where do you think I am, Tom Longboat?
No, sir. I am.
Running makes me feel alive. That's everything.
Tom Lombo was the first Indigenous person to win the Boston Marathon. He ran his way to international fame and became an inspiration to generations of athletes.
Every year, dozens of Canadians are killed or seriously injured because they take risks around railway tracks. Talk to your loved ones about rail safety. Visit stoptracktragedies.ca.
Are you the type who would keep going or stop? It's not easy to stop when you have an addiction. Legalizing cannabis won't stop addiction. It trivializes its consumption. Let's be vigilant. If you need help, visit portage.ca.
The name of the boat and the site where we are right now, we are kind of west-north of Tobermory.
Yes.
It was a lovely trip through here, but this is, I think, your premium favorite dive site. So tell us about it.
Well, it's certainly a popular dive site. We're on the west end of Russell Island, and we're adjacent to the wreck of the WL Wetmore, which was a propeller steamer that basically was the transition technology that took over from wind power in the sailing vessels of the mid to later 1800s. The site is a fascinating one because it's where the steamboat was towing old sailing vessels that were turned into barges, and they encountered a northwesterly gale coming through Devil Island Channel here, and all went aground on top of Russell Shoal. So the Wetmore sits here just off of our bow, and it's a fascinating wreck with a lot of artifacts on it. All of the original expansion boiler tanks from the steam driver there. The original propeller, which has 3 of the 4 blades that were broken off as she was attempting to power across the reef to get away from the weather. So you can imagine that big clang, clang, clang as those blades broke off. The beautiful wooden rudder is still here as well. And most of the sections of the hull and decking are there intact with beautiful structures called knee joints on them, which were the way that they attach the decking and superstructure on top of the hull boards. And also one of the finer features is the anchor, an anchor chain, a very large, what are called wooden stock anchors. So they used iron tangs and center posts and then big hunks of wood across the top of them to help them float when they dropped them, and also to make sure that they turned over when they hit the bottom and the tangs dug into the bottom to give them good anchorage. So lots and lots to see on this site. It's popular because it's fairly shallow as well. So it's a dive site for people of all skill levels, and a lot of artifacts to see on it too. So I always like people to appreciate the fact that this was the technology that essentially replaced wind power and all those beautiful old sailing schooners and sailing barks that went back and forth through that North Main Channel for so many years. And I can't even imagine how beautiful it would have been to see all those boats in full sail going back and forth. But literally within a decade or two at the most, steam propeller drive basically replaced that technology of wind power. So that's a neat part of this site.
It is. And how can the boat still stay intact? Like, is it like the water? Is that keeping things? Like, how come it hasn't rotted?
Well, there's a few things that kind of are in favor for long-term preservation. Of course, the lake here is relatively low in nutrients, so you don't have the same abundance of microorganisms and other things that sort of eat away at wooden structures like they would, say, in an ocean environment, or even in other lakes like Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Plus, the water here is relatively colder, so that tends to preserve them as well. But having said that, they do deteriorate over time. There's no question that these wrecks are not in the same condition. I've been diving here for over 50 years myself, and I've noticed a definite deterioration in many of the wrecks, partly because of the pressure of diving on them, but also just the wind and waves and weather in the wintertime. This can be a violent area with waves and weather in the late part of the fall, and that actually does damage to the boats as well. So eventually Mother Nature will win out and turn them all into small bits of rubble, but at least for this next 50 years or so, we can enjoy these wrecks in nice shape.
Now, how many wrecks would be here in the area? Like,
Yeah, we talk about at least 24 or so that are diveable and popular wrecks in the area, but there are many hundreds and perhaps even thousands of wrecks up in here that have never been found that are known. And actually, we're very lucky to have a gentleman here that is working on a previously unexplored wreck site not too far from here.
So you're doing some, well, I call it treasure hunting. That's probably the wrong term.
Yeah.
But you're looking for something in specific?
Yes. In 1884, we have a historical record of the ship, the Golden West, which was a bark. And actually originally it was a bark, and it was then converted to a schooner. It went down on Snake Island, which is about 5 nautical miles that way, to our sort of northeast. Mm-hmm. And 1884 went down. What happened with it is it ran aground, and the reports show that 3 days later, when the people came out, there was no lives lost. They were able to get to shore safely. When they came out to inspect the ship 3 days later for insurance purposes, they considered it a total loss. Now, probably that means the ship had just broken up, so there was no likelihood of salvaging any cargo because it was corn, and the corn just, of course, would have dispersed.
Right.
The wreck itself probably broke into smaller parts, smaller bits, and floated away or sank on site. We've been looking at this as part of the Ontario Marine Heritage Committee. We've been looking at this wreck looking for the search of the wreck for about 10 years now. And we have found a sizable section of wreckage that we have confidence to say is part of the Golden West. We can't say that definitively, but it likely is. And we have several sonar targets, sort of side scan sonar looking high technology using the to look for these sections of the wreck. We have several targets, and we want to go down, and ground truth is the term. You go down to see if it's a rock or is it actually shipwreck. And in fact, today we have divers out there right now checking out some of these sites. So that's just one of a number of wrecks that are known to be lost in this area. And many of the wrecks that we know of are still unidentified as well. So we, the Marine Heritage Committee and others, are still doing research on some of these unknown wrecks. The captain suggests that there's a couple of dozen. Of those, probably 6 or 7 at least, I think, are still unknown as to what wreck it is. So there is research we can still do trying to find out the names of those wrecks.
And that's all part of the OMHC.
Some of the work that the OMHC does, yes.
Up here.
And you asked about the deterioration of the wrecks. The OMHC actually has a long-term study on the deterioration of some specific wrecks. Years ago, Parks Canada, we partnered with Parks Canada. Markers were put on some of the wrecks, in particular the Arabia, the King is another one that's just over here. We took measurements 15 or 20 years ago of exactly for example, if you've got a hull that's intact, we'll measure the width of the hull back then, compare it each year to see if it's going to finally succumb to gravity and open. So that research is still ongoing as well.
And you have to let it fall apart. You can't touch it. You can't.
Within the national park has its own policies, and I don't think they're going to be in the mood to try to preserve these things because that's not a natural process. Right. They're going to go with the natural process. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Years and years ago, there's a wreck in the harbor called the Sweepstakes, and some reinforcement was done with that. I think that was back in the 60s or maybe the 70s. Yeah. And that has probably preserved the wreck, maintained its structure a bit.
Right.
We don't do that sort of thing anymore.
Yeah.
Is the basic line. Yeah.
And it's probably impossible to do that as well, right? It's ultimately cost-wise, it's just not feasible.
As we say, nature's going to take its course, and ultimately it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And to me, they're just as fascinating falling apart as they are when they're standing up.
That's true. Makes it the adventure.
Yeah.
Adventure. We are going to head back into Tobermory and maybe hook up with Scarlett. Captain Rich, it's been a wonderful day out on the water. Please thank Kelly of the Divers Den for the use of the boat today to get us out, and we made it back safe and sound.
Well, you're very welcome. That was our job, to get you back here safe.
And how can people get a hold of you guys if they want to have a tour of the ships?
Any information your viewers might want is available on our website at diversden.ca.
Great. Thanks so much, Rich.
You're welcome. Roger that.
We are here at the Parks Canada Visitor Centre with Scarlett, who got us all hooked up today with an absolutely fantastic day on the water. Tell us about a couple of things that you have been doing along the geological end of what we were on today.
Sure. Well, the Ontario Marine Heritage Committee has been around for a very long time. We started in 1975 with about 10 members, and one of our big projects was actually up here in Georgian Bay at the prehistoric submerged shoreline study. So a long, long time ago, these lakes were empty. There was no water in Georgian Bay or Lake Huron, and they were glacial lakes instead, Lake Stanley and Lake Huff. And we surmised that probably there was some life or some indigenous activity in those dry areas. And we found there were 3 successive stages, 600, 900, and 300 years of dry land, which allowed plants and animals to migrate into those areas. So the next evolution would be that man would then settle and do activity areas and perhaps even have habitation sites there. We found 4 channels or river sites in that area. And in fact, we found a waterfall larger than the one in Niagara Falls.
Oh my.
And at the time Niagara Falls was running dry, you could have called us the honeymoon capital of the world because the water was running pretty big here.
Wow.
But of course there was nobody around. So,
Right, yeah, well, yeah,
So,
there'd be no one around to tell the tale. Yeah.
So, I mean, our group is really great. It's made up of not just divers, it's also made up of non-divers. And marine heritage is something that should be accessible to everybody. So one of the reasons we've come to the Visitor Center is to show people that there are other avenues that you can explore marine heritage. There are videos that they present here. There are shipwrecks, parts of them that are here.
Yes.
So that is the framework. You can see the keel and keelson and the stem at the very end. So it gives you an idea of what divers are seeing underwater as well. And some of the artifacts, this is from the Arabia. She was a schooner that went down in 1884. There was some corn cargo, and you can see that was recovered. And those are some of the other artifacts. And our group were some of the first people who actually documented this, not just for the sake of taking things back with them, which was the early premise for most people, but actually to document. And it was the start of knowledge coming to the fore. Rather than taking things for the sake of taking them, we were recording knowledge so everyone could share in the knowledge. And we continue to do that to this day. And we travel the entire province. I'm just fortunate enough to live in this area in Tobermory, so it's really very nice for me, obviously.
Oh,
so,
definitely. So the Ontario Marine Heritage Committee is more than just Tobermory then?
Oh yes, we have members.
It's Ontario.
We have members actually that are outside of Ontario. We had a member fly in last night from Manitoba to help with a project that we're doing up here in Georgian Bay in the next couple of days. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a dedicated
so much
group.
Bigger. It's a very dedicated group, and I had no idea that it existed up here or the things that you were doing.
Yeah.
So you have definitely brought to light a different avenue other than just hopping on the Cheechman and going over to Manitoulin. There's so much more here.
Well, the big thing is always to remember that when people look at water, they don't see what's underneath the water, right?
Yes.
And we're talking not just about historic, but also indigenous sites as well. And you have to look beyond that. So if we're just one group, I'm sure there are other groups, Save Ontario Shipwrecks is doing things, Preserve Our Wrecks is doing things. We're more broad in our base because we do both indigenous and historic, where they concentrate on shipwrecks. But it's, again, bringing that knowledge forward so not just divers have accessible information about the shipwrecks and marine heritage of the entire province.
Right, yeah. Well, it has been an absolute fantastic day, and you have opened my eyes greatly, and hopefully the viewers have enjoyed the day as well, because I think there's something's been learned by everyone today. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Please come back again.
We will, we will. And thanks for watching the show. We'll see you again next time.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.